So therapeutic and psychodiagnostic tools. The number one is free association. What sort of strategies we actually use in psychoanalysis? And free association is what you see in movies, like you enter a psychoanalyst's office or psychotherapist's office, you lie down on a couch and the psychotherapist is sitting there with a notebook and you start talking and he's making notes. That's the movie representation of free association. What actually free association is that you don't interfere. As an analyst, you don't interfere in the patient's free thinking. You let the free thinking and free thought and free speech just come. And you tap into the person's defense mechanisms, like the projections and the repressions, and you just try to go beyond the defense mechanisms into the unconscious mind. And the only way that can happen is you allow the patient to just lie back and talk about whatever comes to their mind. It can be total gibberish, but eventually they start to talk about things that make sense, and eventually they start to make links between what they said in the last session and what they're saying now. And it's sort of a self-realization comes eventually in therapy. It can take years. This process can take years, and you have to be very patient. And I have had professors who've told me that there have been sessions in free association where for an entire hour, the patient has just laid down on the couch and not said a word, and eventually gone off to sleep. And as an analyst, as a psychoanalyst, you're not supposed to say a word. You're not supposed to prompt that, okay, do you want to say something? Are you going to pay for an hour and not say anything? Nothing. If the patient decides that I want to stay quiet for an entire hour, that's what you let them do. And you just sit there and let them be quiet for an hour. So that's how free association actually works. Dream analysis, again, Freud, he was the father of dream analysis. He's written an entire book. For those who are interested, it's called The Interpretation of Dreams. It's a huge 600, 700 page manual with very fine print about dreams. And he relied heavily on symbolism in dreams. So what he basically said was, like I said, in those days, there were no supercars and fast cars. But if you were to dream of a supercar or a fast car, you have an obsession with your genitals. Especially a man has some sort of a obsession with his genitals, and he's trying to attract a very, very out of reach mate, and that's why he's imagining that he has this, very fast car. So in his mind, everything represented the sexual libido, the energy, the libidinal energy, and in your dreams was a symbol of that. So he did a lot of dream interpretation in his work at that time. And also dreams were considered as a function of escaping the superego. So Freud believed that during your waking hours, the superego was completely in control of how you behave. But when you're asleep, the id takes over. And the superego is actually quiet and not interfering. So the id can act out all the desires and all the motives that it wants to act out without the superego interfering. So for example, Freud actually believed that you could have a desire to be assaulted, because a lot of people complain that in their dream and they believe that they see that they're being assaulted. And Freud would say that that is actually something that you fantasize about, that you imagine would happen to you one day, and that it's too damaging for you to bring it to your conscious mind. So when your superego is quiet, your id replays this or enacts this big dream of you being assaulted. That's your fantasy. And yeah, I know it's very radical to think about, but this is what he talks about in dream analysis. He used it very, very effectively in many of his cases. Transference and countertransference is a huge topic, and I don't want to get into it because it took me 4 days of learning from 8 to 5 in a special course on transference, countertransference to actually understand what it is. But I'll just briefly explain it. So like I talked about projection earlier, Paridhi, about how you project your innermost desires and your innermost feelings onto other people. When you're in a therapeutic relationship with a psychoanalyst, what psychoanalysis says is that you as a patient will tend to project those same desires onto your therapist. So for example, I'll give you a very typical example where you have a person who's had a very unloving mother, very cold, frigid mother, doesn't have a good relationship with his mother. if it's a male, and if he's been longing for this sort of loving relationship with his mother, but he didn't get it, and he goes to psychotherapy with a psychoanalyst who's a female, and she's got a very motherly personality, he might start to project all those desires of wanting that mothering from his therapist. So then we see cases of patients inappropriately calling therapists at odd hours of the day, and then you might see this patient asking you things like, should I wear this dress tomorrow, or this shirt tomorrow, or not? In therapy they ask these questions from the therapist, and that shows that the patient has projected their insecurities or their desires of having that sort of parenting onto the therapist. So they have built that up in their mind that the therapist is what they are longing for in their life. Now what happens is, till here it's understandable and easy. What Freud also talked about was countertransference, meaning that I as a therapist become aware of the fact that you're projecting your innermost desires onto me, and I may react positively or negatively to that and counter transfer those feelings back to you. So for example, if I have a difficult relationship with my son, and you as a patient come to me, a male patient, you come to me and you start projecting onto me that you see me as a mother, I may resist because I don't like the feeling of being in that motherhood position with you. And I have a difficult relationship with my own son. So I counter transfer my projection onto the patient. And that can, um, either it can be really effective for psychotherapy, and you really see a huge difference in patients once they start having that sort of projection and that relationship with you, and that transference begins. Or many a times what we see is that the therapeutic relationship breaks. So we see patients and therapists not able to work together because they're not being able to handle these feelings that they bring out in each other. It's a very complicated topic to understand, but this was one of the main um, theories that Freud worked with, was transference, that the patient has to be able to transfer their projections onto the therapist for therapy to work. And the therapist has to be aware of these projections and be able to handle them in order for the countertransference to begin. And then they can start to feel each other's desires and motives, and then the therapeutic relationship can be successful.